please welcome on stage the Scottish Cabinet.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Newell. I'm the Chief Executive of South Ayrshire Council, and I'd like to thank the First Minister and his Cabinet for visiting South Ayrshire Council today as part of the 53rd Travelling Cabinet. Earlier today, ministers visited a number of locations to find out about local initiatives aimed at tackling poverty, building prosperity, protecting the planet and boosting local services. Engaging with people on those topics and many others is always a key objective for any politician. It's now time for you to give your feedback. I know that you'll be keen to start discussions, and thank you very much indeed for attending today. And I'd just like to thank again the First Minister and the Cabinet for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, for your kind words of welcome, and thank you very much to you for hosting us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, you arrived, or some of you arrived, with some musical accompaniment, so thanks to the students from Prestwick Academy, Belmont Academy, Kyle Academy and Queen Margaret Academy for providing that for us. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along to our public discussion today. My name is Jamie Hepburn. I'm the Scottish Government's Minister for Parliamentary Business, and I will be acting as your compare for today. The Cabinet is delighted to be here today. Let me introduce the members of the Scottish Government's Cabinet to you. In the back row, we have Shirley-Anne Somerville, Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Angus Robertson, who covers Constitution, External Affairs and Culture, Jenny Gilruth, the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, Gillian Martin, the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero and Energy, Siobhan Brown, Minister for Victims and Community Safety, and Mary Goujon, whose brief covers Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands. And in the front row, we have Shona Robison, Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government, the Deputy First Minister, Kate Forbes, whose remit covers the economy and Gaelic, Neil Gray for Health and Social Care, and Fiona Hislop, the Transport Secretary. I'm sure many of you will recognise Siobhan Brown, also as your local member of the Scottish Parliament for the Ayr constituency, but I should say today she is here strictly on stage representing the Justice portfolio. This is the first time Cabinet has met in South Ayrshire. It's also the 53rd time Cabinet has been on the road since 2008, taking the opportunity to hear directly from thousands of people in towns and cities all across Scotland. I want to thank our two BSL interpreters, Nathan and Yvonne, for their help in making today's event accessible. South Ayrshire is a beautiful part of the country, and as Mike mentioned, ministers have been out and about today seeing everything it has to offer. So thank you for having us. For myself, for my own part, I was very glad, very pleased to be able to visit Roselle House Galleries and Museum, and I was particularly taken by the paintings by Alexander Gowdy depicting Burns's Tam O'Shanter. And I have to say, you're incredibly lucky to have such a valuable resource and facility on your doorstep. Following our visits, ministers held a formal meeting of Cabinet in the Council Chambers room just next door to here. I'll introduce the First Minister in a moment or two so you can say more about what the Government is doing to support communities in South Ayrshire and to tackle the Scottish Government's 4 priorities of eradicating child poverty, growing the economy, improving public services and protecting the planet. The main purpose of today's event, however, is to hear from you. And we are very much looking forward to listening to your views and answering your questions about local or national issues and the work of the Scottish Government. We'll start proceedings by hearing from the First Minister, and then I'll open the floor to take your questions. We'll have about an hour for that, and following that we hope you will be able to stay to join with us for refreshments and the opportunity to continue the discussion with individual ministers. So without further ado, will you please welcome to the stage the First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for attending this afternoon and for being part of the discussion that involves the Cabinet's visit to Ayr and South Ayrshire today. I'm particularly delighted to welcome representatives from South Ayrshire Youth Council, which is an important channel of dialogue and communication with us all to understand the perspectives and the outlook of young people within this community in order for that to be reflected on by government in the priorities that we take forward. As Jamie said, this is one of many occasions in which the Cabinet has visited different parts of Scotland, and I view this as a crucial part of how we engage with members of the public around Scotland. The purpose of today's discussion is to listen and to explain, for the Cabinet to listen to the perspectives of people in this community and for us to explain the approaches and the responses that we have to the challenges that you put before us and also the priorities that we take forward as a government. It's an important channel of communication for us to understand that in different parts of the country, different issues will be of greater significance than others, and we need to reflect that in the policy making that we take forward. So it's vital that we have that two-way conversation in the course of this afternoon about the issues that we face. And I'll talk a little bit about the perspective of the government once I've reflected on the community of which we are part today. I've had the opportunity in the course of today, along with colleagues, to take part in a number of visits, and also the Cabinet meeting has taken place here in Ayr Town Hall. But the visit reminds us of the essential strengths and the different components of the community of Ayrshire. And this community, of course, has a rich and dynamic history set in some of the most beautiful coastal landscape in the country. But the contribution of Ayrshire, and particularly the significance of the work of Robert Burns, has been a foundation to the cultural identity of Scotland. And one of the things that really matters to the Scottish Government is the strength of that cultural identity in Scotland and the need to nurture and to support the development of that cultural identity in Scotland and the practice of that cultural activity in all parts of the country. And of course that's nowhere more significant than in Ayrshire, the birthplace of our national poet. But there is so much more that Ayrshire contributes to Scotland and to our 21st century identity as a country. The economy of Ayrshire is a strong economy founded on some of the strongest and the most dynamic engineering practices in the world, founded on some of the strengths in innovation and creativity that emerge from the work that has surrounded the development of many of the new businesses and new ventures that have emerged around about Prestwick Airport, for example, with a growing sense of expertise that is a formidable strength for Scotland. The area of Ayrshire, the county of Ayrshire, has such a formidable strength in the hospitality sector, with so much to demonstrate about the strength of the hospitality sector and what it offers to the whole of the country, and how that weaves into the cultural identity of this locality. And then, of course, the relationship of this community to golf is of significance in relation to a contribution to our economy as well. But while there are all those strengths, there will, of course, be challenges, and that's really what government priorities are all about addressing. They're about addressing the challenges that lie before us, and to make sure we can be as successful as we possibly can be as a society. So when I became First Minister a few months ago, I set out to Parliament and to the country the priorities that were going to dictate the policy approach that I was going to take forward, the priorities that were going to shape the interventions of the Scottish Government. And there are four priorities that we take forward: the eradication of child poverty, growing the economy, improving our public services and protecting the planet. And I want to just take a few moments to illustrate two things about those priorities. The first is the significance of each of those priorities, and I'll talk about that in more detail. But the second is the interconnection between those four priorities. So for me, and for my colleagues in the Cabinet, upon whom I depend to take forward many of the detailed work that's undertaken in these areas. It's not good enough for us to succeed in just one area of policy. We have got to be successful in all four, so that we get the benefits of the impact of any of the policy interventions that we take forward. So let me just tell you about some of the priorities that are in our mind in relation to these four principal priorities that we take forward. First of all, on eradicating child poverty. At the heart of the challenges that we face within our society is the prevalence and the persistence of poverty in our communities. And this government is determined to intervene there to ensure that that is not a pattern that is repeated in the future, that we are able to take the necessary action now to intervene and to act to eradicate child poverty in our communities. So when I look at the intervention that we've made, for example, with the Scottish Child Payment, which is directly supporting families the length and breadth of the country to lift their own incomes to enable children not to live in poverty any longer. And the effect of that, as one of our policy interventions, alongside steps to support families to enter, parents to enter employment through the provision of one of the most comprehensive offerings of early learning and childcare that will be available around the world, and certainly the best offering here within the United Kingdom. We're taking steps to make sure that families are well supported, to make sure children are not living in poverty, because all of us will know the corrosive effect of poverty within our society. And we take forward that work in a whole range of different ways, through the direct intervention of family support, but through also the effectiveness of our public services. And I saw a very good example of that today at Ayr Grammar Primary School, which was delivering the type of intervention to support children to achieve their full potential right here in the heart of this community. So that agenda of eradicating child poverty has to weave through all of the different policy approaches that we take forward. But none of that is possible without us achieving our second priority, which is to grow the Scottish economy, to make sure that we enhance and support the realisation of economic opportunity within Scotland. And we take that forward by the steps to invest, for example, in local infrastructure, to support the development of the capacity and the capability of the Scottish economy, to invest in our universities and our colleges, to make sure they have got the potential to enhance economic opportunity within our society. We also encourage and support the creation of the most attractive investment climate possible, so that we can make it practical and plausible for different organisations to decide to invest here in Scotland. And the Deputy First Minister, Kate Forbes, leads our efforts within government to make sure that Scotland is viewed to be a dynamic and attractive investment location to those who wish to invest. And of course, we're very proud of the fact that for nearly a decade, Scotland has been the best performing part of the United Kingdom in terms of foreign direct investment other than London and the South East. So we have a formidable track record on investment, but we are now taking steps to make sure that our investment opportunities can be anchored on even more secure foundations in the years to come. Because the more successful we are at growing and developing the Scottish economy, the more we are able to take action to eradicate child poverty and to pursue our other objectives. The third area is in relation to improving our public services, and this is an issue which occupies a huge amount of my time, because fundamentally government is here to serve the public and to make sure that members of the public are able to achieve the service and the outcomes and the support to which they are entitled. And that relates across a whole range of different policy areas, whether that's in the National Health Service, in our education system, in the transport system, in the justice system, in the work of local government, in the work that we take forward on housing. All of these different areas are integral to ensuring that we deliver the highest quality public services. Now, we've had, over many years, huge challenges to wrestle with in relation to the The value of the public finances, the austerity agenda of recent years has been a huge challenge for us to overcome in delivering public services that meet the needs of the public. So I'm the first to accept that there will be challenges in the delivery of public services. But what I want to assure you about today is that the Scottish Government is absolutely focused on delivering the best outcomes possible for members of the public, and to do that through enhancing the work of our public services. And I'm sure we'll explore some of those questions today. And the final area that we cover in our priorities is protecting the planet, taking the action that is necessary to ensure that our society is equipped to make the transition to net zero and to deal with the implications of climate change which are affecting every part of our society today. And our agenda on climate action will be a combination of some local and some national, some specific and some strategic interventions that we take forward. For example, Parliament tomorrow will consider the last stages of the climate change legislation that is in place to regulate the way in which the government takes forward its action on achieving net zero. So Parliament will decide what is the basis of the law in its deliberations tomorrow. But earlier on today, along with the Transport Secretary Fiona Hislop, I was inaugurating a further expansion of the electric vehicle charging network just on the outskirts of Ayr. Now, what was interesting about that is that it is an investment that's been made by a private company. So the signal that the Scottish Government is giving of wishing to make the transition to net zero is being responded to by the investment of a private company. So the public purse is not paying for that infrastructure, but our policy signal of being determined to make the journey to net zero is attracting that investment. And secondly, the usage of these facilities is now increasing significantly to encourage more and more private investment of these type of elements of our infrastructure. And the third thing is that by inaugurating that particular development in Ayr, we reach a point in Scotland where we now have 6,000 electric vehicle chargers in Scotland. We were supposed to reach that point in 2 years' time. So because of the leadership that has been given to this area of policy, we've got to that point 2 years early, which is an encouragement that if we're prepared to give the policy leadership, we will attract the investment and will be able to bear the fruits of that investment into the bargain. So that landmark achievement is a significant contribution towards some of the practical steps that we've got to take. Now, there are other major strategic steps that we are taking in relation to the net zero agenda. At the other end of the country, in the Highlands, we have two very significant strategic developments that are anchoring the development of the offshore renewable energy developments that are taking their course in Scotland, which will attract thousands and thousands of jobs to Scotland, again as a consequence of the policy interventions that we are putting in place. So my use of those two examples of the electric vehicle charging points here in Ayr and the strategic offshore renewable energy projects off the coast of Scotland and the north of Scotland are to illustrate the fact that if we're going to succeed in our journey to net zero, we have to have a combination of the local and the strategic, and every community has a part to play in all of that. So in looking at all of those different policy areas together, the eradication of child poverty, growing the economy, improving our public services and protecting our planet, that's what the Scottish Government's agenda is focused on achieving, because if we do that, we will contribute significantly to making Scotland as successful as Scotland can possibly be within the policy constraints in which we operate. We obviously have some pretty big choices coming up to us in relation to the formulation of our budget. The UK budget took place last Wednesday. We have the Scottish budget, which flows from that, will be announced to Parliament by Shona Robertson on the 4th of December, and then we'll embark on engagement with Parliament to secure the passage of that budget. Because so many of the decisions that are made about the allocation of public spending will have an effect on our ability to achieve those priorities of eradicating child poverty, growing the economy, strengthening public services and protecting the planet. And those are the issues that we will wrestle with in the course of the period that lies ahead. And taking forward that agenda, I want to just say, lastly, a few words about how we go about doing that. And how we go about doing that, to me, is critical. Because one of the lessons that I've learnt in the time that I've spent in government is that generally there is no solution to a particular problem or challenge that's kept in one neat little compartment hosted by one little organisation. It tends to be that the issues that we wrestle with are complex issues across society, and we need to work in partnership and in collaboration to achieve our objectives. So part of the discussions we've had in Ayr and Ayrshire today have all been about establishing those partnerships, about how we work together with business, with local authorities, with trade unions, with community organisations, with the voluntary sector, making sure that all of us have a strong sense of how we work together, how we fit together, and how we can achieve our objectives together. And it's in that spirit of partnership that the Scottish Government works, that we try to find common ground, we try to work with different organisations to achieve their objectives and to make sure that we deliver on the policy commitments that we put forward. So my invitation to you today and on an ongoing basis is to engage with the Scottish Government in a way that enables us to hear your aspirations and your challenges, to understand what this community can do to address those, and how we in the Scottish Government can use our resources and our intervention to support you where that is possible to do. And I look forward in the course of this afternoon to exploring some of these questions and working together on how we can make Ayrshire and Scotland as successful as we possibly can do. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, First Minister. I am now going to turn to your opportunity to question the First Minister and other colleagues on stage. What I intend to do is take questions in batches of 3, and then I'll invite the First Minister to respond and to bring in other colleagues to answer 2. Now, we normally have more questions than time available, so if you don't get your chance to ask your question, I apologise in advance. We will try to get through as many as possible, but there is an evaluation form, or there should be an evaluation form left on your seat. Feel free to complete your question on that, and if we don't get to it today, we will collect them in at the end, and all questions will receive a written response. So let's get underway. Can I ask that you raise your hand if you have a question? Wait. And that's good to see, hands going up straight away, and wait for a microphone to arrive. We have 3 roving microphones. Stuart, Billy and Kate are going to help me with that, and I'll try and make sure we go across the entire room. And I should probably tell you, I'm going to come to the young people first. If you got your hand up just now, you can probably put it down, but I'll come back to you in a minute, because as the First Minister said, we are lucky to be joined by some young people from the Scottish Ayrshire Youth Council today. So I intend to go to them first to ask a few questions. A request to not just the members of the Youth Council, but to all people, if you keep your questions brief as possible, that will enable us to get through questions as quickly as possible. So who of the young people would like to go first? And I know it's always difficult to go first. There we go. And if you don't mind saying your name as well.
Ewan Clark from South Ayrshire Youth Council. This week is National Youth Work Week. How do you plan on investing in youth work?
Okay, thank you, Ewan. Any of the other young people got a question?
Aisha Bidlal from the Youth Council. Pupils, it sometimes feels like they do not have much of an impactful voice when it comes to what decisions are made. So could we as students debate issues that happen in Parliament more often? Is there any way to promote that?
Okay, and one more at this stage from another of the members of the Youth Council.
Why is minimum wage lower for young people?
And if you don't mind your name?
Timur Zinchenko from Youth Council.
Okay, thank you. Okay, First Minister, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Jamie. Let me tackle the issue about youth voice, and then I'll get the Deputy First Minister to talk about the minimum wage, and then I'll get the Education Secretary to talk about the National Youth Work Week. And perhaps Social Justice Secretary might want to say something about that too. On people voice, I think it's absolutely vital that the voice of young people is heard at all levels of our society and our system. And it's interesting, having been in Ayr Grammar Primary School this morning, it was pretty visible to me that young people were influential in making their choices about their learning, even at very young ages, because they were given the freedom to exercise their choices about how they pursued their learning within the classroom. And that's the starting point for me, or an early starting point about the expression of pupil voice. And I think much of our education system does place a significant attention on making sure the voice of pupils is heard clearly within our system. But it goes much further than that. Parliament supports, and indeed very shortly the Cabinet will have a meeting with representatives of the Children's Parliament and the Scottish Youth Parliament. And that's an opportunity, it happens once a year, where those representatives can set out to ministers directly, face to face, the issues and the priorities that are on their mind, so that we can hear that first hand from young people. So I think in every respect and at every level in our society, we've got to be open to those opportunities to listen to the voice of young people. Do you want to?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing to say is that I absolutely agree with you, and the Cabinet agrees with you, that there shouldn't be a difference in what young people are paid in terms of the minimum wage and what older people are paid. Now, it's one of those economic areas that's not directly within our control. So what we've done instead is to try and use every power we do have to ensure that the real living wage is paid as far and as widely across Scotland as possible. Now that just went up from £12 to £12.66 per hour, and we think it should be paid to anybody who is working on an equal basis. Now, the key to how we do that are things like, if we're providing government grants, we want to see an employer paying the real living wage. Or when it comes to social work, for example, an expectation of paying the real living wage. So we absolutely believe that it is a question of fairness, of justice. And if you're doing the same job, why should you be paid less because you're slightly younger? So that would be our strong view, and we're using every power that we have, because we can't set the minimum wage as a Scottish Government, but we can do everything we can possibly do to say that we expect the real living wage to be paid irrespective of how young you are.
Thanks, Kate. Jenny?
One of the questions was about debating issues in your classroom, is that right? The issues in Parliament. So you're really lucky because you go to school in Scotland, and there's obviously I'm going to say this, I should say, as a former modern studies teacher, but modern studies is the subject in which you can debate any of the issues we're debating in Parliament in your classroom. And that subject's pretty unique to the Scottish curriculum and gives you that opportunity to debate different ideas that we might be talking about in Parliament. You asked a question, I think, about the issue of youth work. And of course, we in the Scottish Government have got a really unique approach to supporting schools through the Scottish Attainment Challenge. And a lot of that funding, and I should say over £20 million has come to South Ayrshire since the scheme was launched, is helping head teachers to invest in, for example, youth work. And I see on a weekly basis really strong examples of head teachers working with youth workers, working with a range of different partners, because it's not always just about teachers. We know that in schools. I was meeting with some of the partners who were just standing outside earlier on and hearing a little bit more about the partnership approach in South Ayrshire. Hello to Hayley, who I think might be in the audience, who I did my teacher training with. But it was great to hear a little bit more about how social work, youth work, a range of different partners are helping to support schools, because it isn't always just about your teacher, and youth work plays a really important role in that respect.
Okay, thanks so much, Shane.
Okay, we have three other members of the Youth Council, so I'm going to invite them in, and then I will open up to the not so young members of the audience, if we could put it that way.
My name's Alex from the Youth Council. On the subject of net zero, I want to know how the government will make it more safe for children to cycle to school.
My name's Katie White. How are you following through with your manifesto pledge to supply Scottish students with laptops and other devices?
My name's Kayla Hughes from the South Ayrshire Youth Council. What are you doing to assist young people through the cost of living crisis?
Okay, First Minister.
Okay, let me take the last question on the cost of living crisis, and then I'll ask Fiona to talk about the safe routes to school and Jenny to talk about laptops. On the cost of living, one of the, this has been a really, really tough period for everybody for years. And the last 2.5 years have been amongst the toughest, essentially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the fueling of costs of energy prices, and the rise of inflation has made the cost of living really difficult for families the length and breadth of the country. So some of the things that we've done have been, for example, to put in place measures such as the Scottish Child Payment, which supports families directly, now with £26.70 for each eligible child each week, which is designed to help family incomes. But we've also taken other steps, for example, such as the introduction of the under-22s bus pass, which has, one of the things that you can't always predict in government is as to what's going to be the effect of a particular policy measure. And I've been struck by just how big an impact that policy has had on enabling young people to have much greater mobility and to be able to move around an awful lot more easily to pursue their own opportunities. So that has helped to reduce the costs of travel for young people and for families. And a third thing that we have done has basically been to focus on where we can try to put in place measures to reduce the cost for families in support of their children. So, for example, reducing the cost of the school day has been a priority in terms of reducing school clothing costs and a variety of other measures that go with it to just try to make it easier for families to manage in a challenging set of circumstances. And these issues about the cost of living will be central to the budget choices that we make in the course of the next few weeks in the Scottish Budget. So, Fiona, I'll come to you and then to Jenny.
So clearly, having safe routes to school, it will encourage more people to cycle. We want that. We want to try and reduce the number of cars that the parents are using to take their children to school. So clearly, this is the way forward. In terms of our support, so we will work together with South Ayrshire Council. They deliver a lot of the schemes that we, as a Scottish Government, fund through our active travel funding. And to give you some examples, I know South Ayrshire are planning routes between Troon and Dundonald specifically to help on pedestrians walking, but also cycling to school. We've just provided them funding for from a road safety fund, because I'm very concerned about not just drivers and accidents, but what can happen potentially with pedestrians and obviously cyclists. So we've just given South Ayrshire Council in the last couple of weeks £218,000 to help with what's road safety aspects. But the biggest amount of funding comes from the Active Travel Fund, and we've got a record level of active travel funding this year, even though we've had to scale back because of all the pressures. And the smart planning of that, again going back to the student voice, I mean, in terms of the routes that you travel, and quite often you'll be able to work with your school and inform the council as to what would be the priorities. But I've given you an example of one that's just happening, and in terms of the design of that taking place. But that's the kind of big shift that we have. And the more people get used to whether it's walking, wheeling or cycling, then that also helps. I think we also have to be trying to tackle the number of cars on the road. So we're trying to encourage people to use the buses, as we've just heard with the the free bus travel, but also to encourage more people to use buses, because obviously the less traffic there is on the road, particularly at times when young people are travelling to school, the safer you will feel and also be. So that's part of what we're trying to do to help that agenda.
Thanks, Phil. Jenny?
Minister. So we did deliver significant funding to councils during the pandemic for laptops and for digital devices, and that made a huge difference. So councils like Falkirk, for example, delivered universal provision of laptops, others did likewise, but not all local authorities did the same thing, so we have a bit of a mixed approach at the current time. We want to encourage them all to get there, though I'm always struck when I'm in schools, and the First Minister, as you were hearing, and I were in Ayr Grammar Primary School this morning, meeting with young people all experiencing a level of digital learning in terms of how they experience the curriculum. So what we've said that from next year is we're going to target funding to families who are most in need, because this is about young people, but it's also often about families being digitally excluded. So we're going to target that funding through a programme through Connecting Scotland to those who are most in need of that help and that support. And I suppose the final thing I would say is, having been in a classroom before, I also recognise we have to have a balance of digital learning with other types of learning. And a report that was published by the UN last year talked about approaches to digital learning not always necessarily being where we would want them to be. And we know that the increase in screen time and the use of mobile phones, for example, has increased levels of anxiety in the next generation too. So we want to help teachers deliver that balance of digital approaches, recognising where they might be able to use more traditional approaches too.
Thanks, Shane.
Okay, before I move to question, I wonder if you can indulge me and join me in thanking members of the Scottish Youth Ayrshire Council for getting us off to a great start for our Q&A. Okay, now I'm going to take them in batches of 3. If you can remember to give your name, short and sharp questions would be appreciated, and I'll try and get right across the room. I'm going to start with this gentleman here.
Thank you very much indeed for that presentation. My question centres on AUKUS, which you will know is a £300 billion programme between the UK, the US and Australia. And my question is, what is Scotland's contribution to that?
Sorry, your name?
Malcolm Wall from MSM Limited.
Thank you, Malcolm. Kate, where are you? I can't see you. There you are. And a question right there, next to you. Right there, Kate. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ben. I was just wondering, why don't young carers have ring-fenced funding?
Okay, and Billy, a question here. Yeah.
It's Dr. Gillian Evans, and the First Minister is very aware of the work of Beth Morrison. As Education Secretary, he refused to put statutory guidance for restraint and seclusion to protect the most vulnerable children in our schools. Will the First Minister redeem himself and ask all the SNP MSPs to support Beth Morrison's Callum's Law as it goes through the Scottish Parliament?
Okay, thank you. First Minister.
Okay, I'll get Angus Robertson to deal with the question on defence, and on the young carers question, I will get Neil Gray to deal with that. Can I say a little bit, I'm going to ask Jenny Goruth to just say a little bit more about Callum's Law and Beth Morrison's work. First thing I want to say is that I greatly admire Beth Morrison, and I've met Beth and I've met Callum. I've spent a lot of time with them listening, and I have my own constituents who are involved in this issue. And this issue relates to the physical restraint of young people in care situations and educational settings. And the first thing I would want to say is that I view the use of restraint as absolutely a last option. So it's not something that I think there is a place for, but should the safety of a young person be in jeopardy, I accept there are circumstances in which restraint has to be or can be applied, but it should be as an absolutely last resort. Now, when I was Education Secretary, I consulted on the development of guidelines that would essentially have led to implementing the practice that I've just talked about. And we opted to take forward a voluntary approach as opposed to a statutory approach. There is a statutory provision within Parliament being considered by Parliament now, and obviously the Government is engaging with that. And I'll get Jenny to, perhaps you could pick up where it is now, Jenny.
Thank you, First Minister. I think that's helpful in setting out where we are. And obviously Daniel Johnson, as you'll be aware, has brought forward a members' debate on this, and as I understand it, he has secured cross-party support. So I've been meeting with Daniel very regularly to see what more we might be able to do to listen to his proposals, but also from a government perspective to support some of the changes that I think will be coming forward. I don't want to prejudge the outcome of that debate, but I have met, as the First Minister has, with Beth Morrison, and heard the very real challenges that she experienced with her son. And none of us want that to be replicated across the country. So a commitment from me that I will work with Daniel on what we can do, and I will listen, of course, to the debate as that will come forward now through his members' debate, and the Government will respond in due course.
Angus.
Well, thank you very much for the question, Malcolm. The question relates to cooperation between the UK, the US and Australia in relation to the development of an Australian nuclear submarine programme. The question was, what is Scotland's role in it? The answer is none. Defence is not devolved. The Scottish Government is not directly responsible in either defence policy or decision making. Would I wish it to be different? Yes. I would wish Scotland... I understand.
Okay.
Indeed. So just very briefly, Jamie, just add to the issue of supply chain. Obviously, that may well be something that involves companies that are based in Scotland. There are defence sector companies which are part of the UK nuclear weapons programme. Again, that is a reserved area. It's not a devolved area. Would I wish that to be different? Yes, I would wish that to be different. I would wish us to be able to make decisions about defence in Scotland, and I would prefer Scotland to be like our northern European neighbours, whether that's Denmark or Norway or Sweden or Finland, conventionally armed, working with our neighbours and friends in NATO, but as a country that does not host nuclear weapons.
Thank you very much, First Minister, and thank you to Ben, who had the opportunity to meet alongside other colleagues from South Ayrshire Young Carers that were on the stall outside of our meeting earlier on. I fully recognise the incredible work that young carers do and the support that needs to be provided to ensure that they can keep doing that work, but also keep living your own lives and have the opportunity to flourish for yourself as well. I fully recognise that, and I know that the Local Health and Social Care Partnership is very well engaged with the South Ayrshire Young Carers on this point, and the importance of making sure that funding is available for you to have trips for respite breaks and for exploring other opportunities that you wish to see individually. And I'd be more than happy to have a discussion afterwards around some of the particular areas of priority that you would wish to see within this local area, so that that can be fed back to the Health and Social Care Partnership.
Okay, we'll take our next three questions. Kate, there's a question here from Women in Black.
Sorry, I've been asked to read this.
That's fine, no problem.
My name is Nathan. As the First Minister mentioned there, we love our history in Ayr. Just a few sentences that kind of historically frame this question. It's been exactly 40 years since the UK government declared that the act of a parent forcibly removing or abducting their child from the child's home without the consent of the other parent was a criminal offence. But this act would only be criminal where the victims were English or Welsh children, not those living in Scotland. In 1984, the Scottish Law Society immediately recognised the risk and recommended complete reform of abduction laws, but nothing changed. Recognising the responsibility, the Scottish Government finally began consultation 8 years ago on what was by that time dubbed the Kidnappers' Charter. My two children were abducted abroad by their mother from their home here in Ayr in 2019. Every year since then, the Scottish Government has told me that consultation on legislation reform is ongoing. Using figures from Reunite International, it's estimated that since my 4-year-old and 1-year-old were taken from their home. A further 300 to 360 children have experienced the same trauma and abuse. You mentioned going to Ayr Grammar this morning. That is about the entire population of Ayr Grammar School. It was clear in 1984, and it is clear now. Children in Scotland are at greater risk than their counterparts south of the border. Can the Scottish Government tell us why we are still operating under completely ineffective 40-year-old abduction legislation? And how many more children do they estimate will be inhumanely and irreparably damaged by their forced removal from their homes here in towns like Ayr, while the Scottish Government simply report that consultation on the matter is ongoing?
Okay, thank you, Nathan. Now, I gave you a wee bit longer there, but I did say expeditious questions that will let us get through more. There's a question here, Billy, in the middle. Lady in the, I don't know, would you call that a mustard-coloured coat? Apologies if I've got that wrong. Ginger, okay, we'll go with that then.
Christine Smith, I've got a vested interest in this question, being one of the not-so-young members of the audience. I would like to put to you the National Care Service, that the government is not going to be watering down its commitment to this in the face of all the lack of support coming from other areas. Because in my view, having experienced care for the elderly, but I know for the vulnerable as well, that this is something that is imperative going forward to keep standards high, and that the Scottish Government is in overall control of this, setting the standards, the salaries, etc. And if needs be, the Council implement it, but it has to be to the Scottish Government standard. And this doesn't get put to the side because it is a very serious issue.
Okay, thank you, Christine. And we'll take one from over here. Gentleman at the front, Stuart.
Welcome to Ayr and Ayrshire, First Minister and Cabinet, Alistair Dobson. I think there might be some answers to some of the questions today already starting to appear during our work in pulling together a regional economic strategy. And looking at all the priorities of the Scottish Government, the regional strategy broadly reflects these. And in fact, the whole world of innovation and collaboration will be driven by this. So some enabling support was not withdrawn, just wasn't forthcoming, but with the new budget consequentials that potentially would come through, how do we make sure that better public services are delivered for the benefit of the economy, so that a budget that did look at as a Syrian, as we say in Ayrshire, for businesses actually drive the productivity that will be needed to keep things going?
Okay, thank you, Alistair. First Minister.
Okay, on the first question, I would like to have a chance to talk to you afterwards to hear directly about your experience here, because I don't like the explanation of time that's involved here. It doesn't make me feel comfortable. So I'd like to hear just what the experience has been. I think the we take time to we review various aspects of legal provision. There are often lengthy consultation processes to go through. Indeed, one of the bill that we'll decide tomorrow, Parliament has been frankly kicking off at us that we've not consulted long enough about that. So there's a kind of but you raise a very serious issue there, sir. So if we could get a chance to talk afterwards, I'll listen with care to your circumstances and see what we can do in response to that. Christian, the question about National Care Service, I'll invite the Health Secretary to say a little bit about this as well. But you talked factually correctly about the fact that there's a lot of opposition to what the government is proposing to do. But what you also did was you set out the perspective from the perspective of somebody who's had experience of the care service, and you said it wasn't good enough. And that's what the National Care Service's proposal is designed to try to address, so that you don't feel the way that you feel. But we feel that we're having to deal with quite a lot of resistance to what we're trying to do, because I want to improve care standards. I don't think the outcomes are good enough. This is a government that believes in the fundamental human rights of individuals. I'm afraid I deal with cases in my own constituency where I realise, where I come to the conclusion, I don't think the human rights of individuals have been respected and followed here. Now, nowhere in the current debate, which you will see in the media about the opposition to what the government is trying to do, will you hear much airtime for the point that you've just made, Christine. And it's your point that we want to try to address with the National Care Service, because currently the arrangements aren't good enough. And one of the comments you said was that the government's ultimately responsible for this. In a sense, that is correct, because, well, believe you me, as First Minister, I feel ultimately responsible for everything. It feels like that all the time. But there's a difference between feeling responsible for it and being able to do something about it. Because the powers don't exist within government to apply those standards, those reasonable standards that you're talking about. And so that's part of what we are wrestling with as we try to navigate our way through this. But do you want to add anything to what I've said?
Well, thank you very much, Christine, for raising the point. And I think, as the First Minister says, that there has been a number of loud voices that have been very well heard amongst the public discourse around the National Care Service over the summer. But one of the voices that has not been heard to the same extent has been service users and disabled people. And their needs and their absolute desire to see a National Care Service come through. And I think that it's incumbent on us as ministers to make sure that is communicated, that we are taking forward a proposal that is wanted by service users, because they want to see consistent standards across Scotland and standards brought up across Scotland, but also that we are bringing up standards of those that are employed to deliver social care services as well, and making sure that we take advantage of some of the legislation that is coming forward at Westminster around employment standards that we might be able to apply. It's in a tricky situation at the minute because of the opposition that has been put forward to me in Parliament, as well as in the public sphere. But we're determined to do everything that we can to bring forward a National Care Service that brings up standards for individuals. And that is what myself, the lead minister, Marie Todd, are determined to do, and to look at all possible avenues for us to advance social care services in Scotland as far as possible. And it's in evidence here in South Ayrshire. I was at Ayr Hospital this morning, and one of the great challenges that they're facing in Ayr Hospital is being able to see patients discharged from hospital back into the community in order to live their lives well where they want to, which is ordinarily at home or in community settings. And that's not possible for too many people at the moment. And that's why we need change. That's why we need to make sure we are persuasive in delivering that change. And certainly that is what we are invested in trying to achieve. So I can give you that reassurance that I think you, the way you put it was put it to one side. In spite of the opposition, we have no interest in putting these matters to one side. We want to make an advancement in social care services in Scotland.
Thank you. Kate.
Regional economic partnerships are absolutely critical. So they are one of the things that I am most keen to see succeed. Now, there was a new focus on them when we published our 10-year economic strategy, based on this notion that for Scotland to flourish, we need every single region to flourish. And Ayrshire is where it's all happening. It is such an exciting place right now in terms of what's happening around aerospace. I was at the college this morning, Ayrshire College this morning, meeting with apprentice after apprentice, and asked each one of them, what's the most exciting place right now in terms of industry to work in? And clearly they're all in the aerospace industry because they think it's just really exciting. Now, the fact that you have such growth and such ambition and such potential means that employers are struggling to recruit. So there's a bigger question there about supporting the aims of the Regional Economic Partnership around skills, attracting people to come and live and work here, and we're right behind that and keen to work with the Council and the College and the UK Government to make sure that the Ayrshire Growth Deal underpins all of that, because there's some serious investment in that growth deal to unlock all of these opportunities.
Okay, thank you all. Well, we'll take a question from the middle, and the woman in the middle there in the blue jacket.
Good afternoon, everyone. Last week, Rachel Reeves committed £1 billion worth of funding for SEND education, the English equivalent of ASN education. I'm wondering if the Scottish Government will commit additional funds for ASN education as well. I hear the Cabinet Secretary frequently say that spending on ASN education is at a record high, but at the same time, so is the amount of children that have additional support needs in Scotland. So whenever we do the maths as parents and carers, the funding per child is down by a third over the last decade.
And your name, if you don't mind?
Janine Leonard.
Okay. And we'll take a question over here. Straight up. So there.
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Blair. I'm a supporter of Scottish independence, and my question is regarding free ports. Given the horror stories that we hear about free ports, and they go on, and the vast sums of public money that are being spent on free ports, can the Scottish Government or the Cabinet, can you tell me whether you support free ports or are against free ports? And do you think they are good for the Scottish economy and the Scottish democracy in large?
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And a question there. There's a lady there with glasses. And yep, you've very well done, Kate.
Hi, I'm Kirsty Johnston. I'm here in two capacities today. One is a Women and Equalities Officer, member of the Association of Scottish Businesswomen and Ayrshire Businesswomen. Obviously, the Scottish Government's led the way in terms of parity of senior political leaders in government with, you know, a well-balanced male-female cabinet. What initiatives and programmes and policies are being developed that will help more women have parity of leadership in business, and also additional financial investment to enable women have the same level of access to finance for business start-ups as men?
Okay, thank you, Kirsty. First Minister.
Right, there's a number of really interesting points in all of that. Let me just say a little bit about a couple of them, and then I'll come to colleagues. On the issue on additional support needs education, I recognise, and I'll get Jenny Gilruth to say a little bit more about this, but there has been a growing need for, there's been a growing number of pupils with additional support needs. And we are increasingly better at identifying the fact that those needs exist. And we've got excellent legislative frameworks in place, but I accept the limitations of resources in delivering against those. A lot of that has been about what we've been wrestling with over the last over 10 years in terms of the austerity agenda. The pressures on public services have been enormous. We've seen some respite from that in the most recent budget, and we now, which you correctly identified from what the Chancellor has said, and obviously we're going through our own budget process. And crucially for us, these issues are, and it's actually, it's an interesting example of another of the points I made in response to what Christine said in front of you a moment ago. The government in Scotland isn't always in control of some of those decisions about the allocation of those resources, because we fundamentally rely upon local authorities to provide the services to children with additional support needs. And once we've passed out the budget, unless we put significant constraints and shackles on those resources, we can't control how they're spent. And that, now there's a philosophical discussion to be had in there. You know, that's not me dodging responsibility, it's just the way the public finances work. I'd be quite happy to take on those responsibilities, but not everybody would like me to do so, because it would constrain local decision making. But what I do say to you is that I recognise, and particularly post-COVID, there has been a sharp increase in the number of children and young people presenting with additional support needs because of the impact of the pandemic and their experience during that, and we have to address that as sharply as we possibly can do. Jenny, do you want to add to that?
I mean, I think, to your point, Jane, these young people were always there. I suspect in the past, certainly when I was teaching and when I was at school in the 90s, they were not diagnosed. So I think we've got much better at providing that diagnosis. However, I recognise the challenge. You spoke about the extra investment from the Chancellor, and look, I welcome any additionality for education. What I would say, though, is we don't start from the same level playing field as schools down south who have been starved of resources for the last 14 years. So we do spend in Scotland more per pupil than any other part of the United Kingdom. You spoke about record investment, and yes, I'm proud of that. The reason we spent in the last financial year £926 million in additional support needs is because we've ring-fenced that funding to protect it. That's why in the last financial year alone we've had an increase of 725 in support for learning assistance. I think that's really good. However, the FM's point about the challenge here in terms of local authorities' role is a very real one and a very timely one given where we are at the current time on teacher numbers. If you're interested in the progress we're making at the current time in terms of our approach as a government, tomorrow we will publish an update on the Additional Support for Learning Action Plan that identifies all the actions we're taking in central government and all the actions being taken by local authorities. I think that action plan is really important. It looks at, for example, initial teacher education. We know that can vary across the piece. I was chatting to the head teacher at Ayr Grammar Primary School on that in the morning. When we look at that measure, those young people that the FM talked about who during the pandemic experienced quite challenging time, we need to think again, I think, about that provision of support. So we've ring-fenced funding for ASN, we're protecting funding for learning support assistance. I think we probably need to look again at specialist ASN teachers. We know that there's been challenges there too. We need to work with local authorities, and I think our response there is through the ASL action plan and working with local authorities like South Ayrshire to provide that support. So I hope you get a flavour of some of the work we're undertaking here, but I do recognise the point you make in terms of additionality from elsewhere.
Thanks very much. Deputy First Minister will answer the Freeports question and the issue on women's participation.
Great. So on Freeports, in terms of a brief history of the subject, it's a UK government initiative, so it wasn't a Scottish government initiative, and we faced the choice a couple of years ago as to whether it would be done to us or we would help shape it. There are fundamental differences between the Freeports in south of the border and the green Freeports that operate in Scotland. There are the two fundamental differences is that anybody operating within a Freeport area in Scotland has to first of all demonstrate their commitment to fair work terms and conditions, and secondly has got to have a commitment to net zero with a fully fleshed out plan around decarbonisation. Now, the level of misinformation that I read about Freeports on social media, about the ones that operate in Scotland, are astonishing. And I think that level of misleading information is based either on what's happening south of the border or just in a sort of basic misunderstanding of what happens here. So some of that misinformation is around what the tax breaks mean, about the powers for businesses that operate in that area, or the amount of public funding that is spent. So I think the facts really matter. And what we're seeing in the Highlands, so I live on the fringes of a green Freeport area, and often say to people, if half the things you claim about Freeports were true, then I don't know what would happen to me in terms of where I live. So in terms of what we're seeing, it's concentrating activity. So if you've got a Japanese cable manufacturing company that could go anywhere in the world, they just chose to go to Cromarty. And they went to Cromarty because they see that build-up of economic activity. And what does that mean for people in the Highlands? It means better funding for infrastructure. It means more housing. It means more jobs in an area that's always struggled in that regard. And generally, in and around that, obviously, the community have to be part of the whole discussions, and they very much are So we'll continue to work with those organisations.
There are no interruptions from the floor, okay?
And I'm sure that any of the chief executives of the respective free ports would be happy to engage. I know the one, Callum McPherson in the Highlands, is very much willing to engage on the basis of fact. Just on the women in enterprise, this is one of my top objectives. We know that for female founders, they only get every 2 pence in every pound that is invested in businesses in Scotland. We need to change that. And we have supported Anna Stewart's work around the pathways, supporting women who are starting a business, growing a business, scaling a business, and collecting the data to do that. So we've initially invested considerable sums of money in that pathways work. There's much more to be done, but basically we want to see a huge growth in support for female-led businesses and female founders who are then supporting the next generation. And it's certainly one of our top priorities, and we're seeing that steady and slow progress to make that a reality. So thank you.
Okay. And now what I'll say is if people want to follow up, we're going to be here after, so you'll be able to do so then. Right, going to take a few more questions. Question here from the lady here, please. Yes, sure.
Thank you. Meg Gordon, and I'm from Ayr. I would like to ask the First Minister a question. I've been an independent supporter for all of my adult life. In fact, I joined the SNP as a youth when I was 15. And I'm getting increasingly frustrated at the ability and the ease of Westminster undemocratically stopping us from getting a referendum, especially since we've been ripped out of Europe. So basically what I'm looking for is the SNP to give some hope of light at the end of this very long and very dark tunnel, and show or demonstrate that long before the 2026 election that there are plans afoot to unblock this impasse and take us on the path to another referendum.
Okay, thank you, mate. Billy, there's a question here in the middle, Billy. Just gentleman there, yes, thank you. Now, if we do these quickly, we might have one more round, just to let you know.
Linked to the previous question, given that the SNP vote didn't turn out in the last general election, does the Cabinet recognise that putting independence and Scotland's resources at the heart before 2026 is really important? And if we don't, SNP's support will go down. If Believe in Scotland fielded candidates in 2026, SNP support would plummet. And given that we've already said several times today that once you give funding over to a local council, you've got very little control, would you encourage Mike Newell to encourage the South Ayrshire Cabinet to open themselves up to an event like today?
Okay. And one question, right at the back, Kate, there's a lady there with striped top, I think we'd say. There, yes.
Hello, Fiona Gibb. Can I ask the panel, has the time come to ban the sale of fireworks to the public?
Okay, thank you. First Minister.
Okay. Was it me? Meg. Well, you're like me. I joined the SNP when I was 15 as well, so I know the calling when it comes in front of you. I think what we're experiencing just now is fundamentally anti-democratic, because some pretty basic questions, which I thought throughout all of my political life had been satisfactorily answered, or there were satisfactory answers around that we all agreed upon, that this was a voluntary union, and if it's a voluntary union, people are free to decide when they want to leave that voluntary union, were established. You know, I can go back, I can remember Mrs Thatcher saying in my political youth that if Scotland wanted to vote for independence, it just needed to vote for a majority of SNP MPs, and that would be it. So, you know, that question of a democratic route was accepted even by the likes of Mrs Thatcher. And it's now, you're right, we're at an impasse. So I'm giving a lot of thought to how we unblock that impasse. Because Scotland's got to have a democratic route to become an independent country, and it's got to become a priority, because that's the aspiration of a very large number of people in our country. And you have to be able to give a route to people to realise their democratic political aspirations, which relates also to the question that the gentleman raises there. That for me, when I look around just now, let's take the budget of last week. Right? The budget last week is wrestling with, but what it set out was that over the next 5 years, despite what the UK government has announced, living standards will hardly improve a jot over 5 years. Why is that the case? Brexit. Brexit has felled the United Kingdom economy, and we have been subjected to go along with that, despite the fact that we voted to stay in the European Union. And the only way out of that for Scotland is for Scotland to become an independent country, and that choice has got to be put to the people of Scotland, and I will make sure we have a credible route to make sure that can be offered to people in Scotland. That's the commitment I give you today, that we must have that route to enable us to fulfil our democratic aspirations. Now, the gentleman asked me about should South Ayrshire Council come up here shortly after us. Well, I'm all for. Look, part of why we come around the country, and I don't know what questions might get asked here, but I think it's important. I've spent my life on platforms explaining myself, answering questions. I do it at 12 o'clock every Thursday nowadays. I didn't quite expect to be doing it, but I'm doing it, and it's vital that we all do it. So yeah, I'm all for that openness and transparency. So I'm sure that will be heard. And then the last question on fireworks, I'm going to delegate to the Minister, who spends a lot of her time just now wrestling with this very question.
Absolutely. Thank you, First Minister. And I think everyone needs to feel safe in their communities, and we have this problem every single bonfire night. We saw disruption last Thursday night in Edinburgh. Thankfully, it wasn't as bad over the weekend, but we did have an incident in Ayr over the weekend where there was one arrest. Unfortunately, having a complete ban on the sale and use of fireworks isn't within our competence of the Scottish Government. I have written to the UK government, the new Labour UK government, to have discussions. You might be aware we have brought in legislation the last couple of years to restrict fireworks locally. You've got firework control zones that can be implemented in South Ayrshire. I know it hasn't been taken forward this year, but other local authorities are looking at doing it. But I am open to it, and we've written to the UK government.
I think one thing I would add to it is that, you know, there is an issue here where fireworks are used in a fashion that is a direct threat to members of the public and to the emergency services. There's a case that, you know, we're getting daily reports about this. A police officer was injured in the city of Edinburgh on Thursday evening because of misuse of fireworks. And, you know, members of the emergency services have got a tough enough job without having to deal with the misuse of fireworks in front of them. So there are, as always in these questions, difficult balances to be struck. But one of the things that ministers are very mindful of, and Siobhan spends a huge amount of time making sure that these arrangements are in place properly, is that there is proper protection for members of our emergency services who are protecting us all in really difficult circumstances. Jimmy.
First Minister, now we have three very short, sharp, succinct questions. We'll be able to get them in. Kate, the gentleman right next to you there in the blue shirt.
Thanks very much. My name's Arnold Thompson. I'm a retired NHS manager. I'm 83, so bear with me when speaking in public.
Short, sharp, succinct, Alan.
I want to find out why we've now got over 10,000 teachers on temporary contracts, which accounts to 18.5% of the total workforce of Scottish education. The previous Education Minister announced that there was to be 3,500 new teachers by next year, the end of the Parliament. She also said that there was to be 145 million invested annually for teachers. That has not happened. These teachers have spent 45 years at university to get a degree. They're now languishing, temporary contracts. They don't know where they're going year after year. We've got kids on supplies contracts that get called at 8 o'clock in the morning to say, can you come in for 6 hours, can you come in for that?
Okay.
This is an absolute disgrace.
Okay, Alan, we've got your question.
Disgrace.
Okay, right. Next question from the middle. Lady here. Glasses holding. There's a microphone coming.
Hi, Cathy. Does the First Minister or indeed the Transport Secretary think it's acceptable on the A77 as the major trunk road serving the ferry ports at Cairnryan to be reduced to single-lane carriageway for 3,000 plus days and counting out of the 3,652 days over the last 10 years?
Okay, thank you, Cathy. And we'll have one from this side. Gentleman here. Bill, I know it's not your side, but you're closest. On you go. Yep.
Thank you. It's about the home installation scheme I'd like to ask First Minister. ECO4 grants, you need to have benefits to qualify for them. A lot of people, just don't. And then this, at the beginning of the year, South Ayrshire Council came along with a scheme-based insulation scheme, and they offered us subsidised insulation in our homes. That offer was subsequently withdrawn because in our block we have a landlord who happens to own more than 3 properties, and therefore we were all excluded. So of the 4 families in the block, no one's getting insulation because of a landlord who's just decided not to participate in the scheme.
Okay.
And there seems to be no way we can make them.
Okay. And what's your name, sorry?
Sorry?
What's your name?
David.
Okay,
David.
thank you, David. Okay, First Minister.
Okay, I'll ask Jenny Garuth, the Education Secretary, to deal with Mr Thompson's point. I'll ask Fiona to talk about the A77 and Gillian, Gillian will deal with the issue about installation.
I think, Arnold, you've been emailing me, so I'm happy to have a chat with you afterwards, and we probably need a more detailed conversation about what is a very political hot topic at the current time. But I think worthwhile remembering in terms of the percentage of teachers in Scotland currently on a permanent contract, that remains at roughly 80%. It's exactly the same as it was back in 2014. So in the last decade, that's remained relatively static. However, you spoke to additionality coming from Scottish Government, and it was actually under the previous Cabinet Secretary that was agreed to, I think, by the then DFM and now First Minister. We would ring-fence £145.5 million of funding to protect teacher numbers. That funding has flown out the door, so it's gone out the door in 2 financial years, and I, at the current time, am working with COSLA to ensure we can allow that funding to go out the door to protect and maintain teacher numbers. It's also worthwhile saying that because of that extra funding, in the last financial year we had an increase in secondary teachers of 175. But I don't, take away from the challenge here. It's a very real challenge for a number of local authorities, but a number of local authorities are maintaining and increasing their teacher numbers, and they are doing that because of investment from this government. And I want to work with the remainder of our local authorities to make sure they take a similar approach so that we can protect outcomes for our children and young people.
Fiona?
On the A77, I'm intending to meet the A77 campaign group on the 21st. They want me to be in Stranraer, you can understand, because the links with Cairnryan. So we've got kind of 2 issues here. We want to see improvements on the A77, but at the same time, if you have work and you have improvements, you're going to get closures to enable that, and also in terms of resurfacing, etc. Obviously, heavily used, we know the issues around HGVs and obviously the impact that has on roads. And I know that that's a challenge when you're on single track, but at the same time we need to have that improvement. There's been about £134 million invested in the A77, including obviously the Maple bypass, really, really important improvement for times, etc., wanted and needed by the community and also by the Road Haulage Association. So I suppose the challenge is how do the road operators manage the improvements that we know have to take place? And for example, example, I know that there's going to be the work up at Dunholm Road on the signalisation. That's going to cause some disruption, but you can't have changes without that kind of management of that. Now, the issue there comes about communication, making sure those that are regularly using it know when there are going to be delays because of traffic management. But it's a big issue. I'm from Ayrshire myself originally. I know how important the A77 is, and I'm looking forward to meeting that group on the 21st.
Thanks, Fiona. Julie?
It's really disappointing to hear stories like this. This is one of the things that's an issue. We had a similar situation in Dundee a few years back where you had one block which the external cladding was going to go in the block, would have made a difference to all those tenants' lives. But we had private landlords who actually couldn't be contacted at the time that was stalling that. This particular situation where you have actually contacted a landlord but owns a certain amount of the properties within the block and is stopping the rest of you from actually getting this area-based scheme. It's actually something that I'll come and speak to you about, because all the area-based schemes obviously are put out by the council and they're managing them. So I think that between us, if we get in touch with one another and I get in touch with the council just to see what the issue there is, these are the sort of things, there's a reason why a travelling cabinet is so good, because these are particular consequences of some of the things we're putting forward that maybe there are either fixes for, because they did find a fix for it in Dundee to my knowledge, and maybe with council speaking to each other about how they've dealt with these situations, that could be the answer, but I'll come and speak to you afterwards.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. I'll let Jamie close off in a minute, or I might just close off. You'll do it.
I had a wee bit written down first, it's up to you.
Sorry?
I have a wee bit written down, it's up to you though.
Right. Well, all I will say is that we've covered about 21 different topics today in questions from members of the public. And the last point that Gillian just made there is important. The purpose of this is for us to hear what's the experience of people in different parts of the country. What are the things that we're perhaps not understanding clearly enough and most vividly from our interactions? So we're out here to listen and to learn. So my colleagues will join, and I will join you for a cup of tea afterwards, and we can pick up on some of these questions that I've got to speak to this couple over here. Excuse me, and then we can take that, we can take it forward. But look, can I just express my warmest thanks to you for taking part in this discussion today. It's been a really interesting explanation of the issues that are on your minds, and we'll do our best to follow these up as we take forward our priorities. But thank you very much for attending today. It's been very much appreciated.
So I suppose the only thing I would say as a reminder, we did get through 21 questions, which I think in an hour is not too bad, but I did see hands that I couldn't get to, and apologies for that again. I would remind you, you do have an evaluation form. Please fill out your question. They will be collected. Everyone will get a written answer. And as First Minister said, you're more than welcome to join us for a cup of tea and we can have a chat there. Thank you very much.